That was very kind, and I certainly appreciate it. It's an honor to be with all of you. I want to thank you for creating this magnificent museum honoring all of our military forces who fought in the Vietnam War. One of the heroes of this war is right here with us tonight. He's Congressman Sam Johnson. He played a pivotal role in the prisoner of war camps of the Vietnam War, including developing the TAP code in cooperation with Lieutenant Robert Peel, who is also with us here tonight. You say, well, why is that so important? They were isolated. They couldn't talk to one another until this was developed, and then that opened the conversations clear all over the camps. It was all just TAP code. They created that. They were imprisoned in the same cell. We also had Lieutenant Philip Butler, Lieutenant Commander Robert Shoemaker, and they were all involved in creating the code. One was caught passing a note, and the guards separated the 4 prisoners, and thus they were able to spread the code. Before that, it was among them. By August 1965, most of the prisoners had been fully initiated and were passing messages and tapping on the walls to fellow prisoners. The building sounded like a den of runaway woodpeckers, recalled POW Ron Bliss. Vice Admiral James Stockdale recalled sending the code. Here's his quote: "Our tapping ceased to be just an exchange of letters and words. It became a conversation. Elation, sadness, humor, sarcasm, excitement, depressing things all came through." Stockdale also talked of the pleasures of coming up with abbreviations, a necessity imposed by the time constraints on both the message giver and receiver. Passing on the abbreviations was like conundrums to be a kind of a game, remembered Stockdale. For example, what would ST mean after good night? That's GN, after GM. Well, that's good night. Well, it's obvious. Sleep tight. And what about DLTBBB? Stockdale laughed to think what their friends back home would think of 2 fighter pilots. Admiral Stockdale and Air Force Major, then Captain Stockdale and Air Force Major Samuel Johnson, in an adjoining cell, standing at a wall, checking for shadows under the door, picking out a final message of the day with their fingernails. Now I'm back to what does DLTBBB means. It means don't let the bed bugs bite. Some of the acronyms entered POW popular usage. One acronym, GBU, God bless you, was seen as a universal sign-off at the end of messages. About 10 days after being shot down and captured by the North Vietnamese, in April 1966, Sam Johnson's captors blindfolded him, put him on trial, accused him of being a criminal, and sentenced him to death. This is what these men went through. Here's what this great man endured, and he is stronger than steel as a result of all of this. They marched him out into the woods and put him in front of a 5-man firing squad. As he prayed harder than he had ever prayed before in his life, Johnson said the North Vietnamese officer told the firing squad to shoot. And then, as they pulled the trigger, all he heard was click, 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 click. There were no rounds in the weapon. Sam says, I praised the Lord, I laughed at them, and they kicked me into a trench and left me there for a while. This is what our men endure for all of us. That was the beginning of nearly 7 years of hell in a prisoner of war camp for Sam Johnson. Shot down over North Vietnam during his 25th combat mission on April 13, 1966, and was not released until February 12, 73. 42 months of that time he spent in solitary confinement. During the Korean War, he had flown 62 combat missions. He took his share of enemy gunfire and flak. He emerged from the Korean War without being injured. He wasn't that lucky over Vietnam. When he was captured, he had a broken, now this tells you again what it's really all about on the front lines. I had a broken right arm, said Sam, a dislocated left shoulder, and a broken back. They took me to a house, they kicked the people out and put me in there with 2 guards. They took over another house from my backseater, Larry Chesley. Johnson used to be right-handed. He's left-handed now because of his right arm that never fully healed. Why did it never fully heal? They kept breaking it again and again. Some of the guards made like they were doctors and put the arm in a cast. A couple of days later, people beat them with sticks and stones. This is the POWs, beat the POWs with sticks and stones as they walked through a town headed to trucks bound for Hanoi. One of the guards got mad at me and threw me up against the front of the truck and broke my arm again, Sam said. Once the prisoners were on the truck, 2 guards separated them so they couldn't talk to each other. In Hanoi, that's his new location, he spent a week in a room by himself with little food or water. Every day, the guards came in with a table and tried to get military information out of you. Johnson said, fortunately, they never knew that I was running the fighter weapons school and had flown all those planes and fired all those weapons. They never found that out. They broke his arm again. They just took it and twisted it all the way around to the front. That's 3 times. It hurt so much that I really didn't care what I did, so I didn't say anything. How's that for strength and courage? They spent a week doing without food or water. They did bring a glass of water to him finally when they came in to interrogate him again. He didn't tell them anything. And after about a week, they gave up. Now, isn't that an incredible story of courage and valor, patriotism and commitment? Then a different group came in and said, we're going to let you go to your room, which was a jail cell in Hanoi. They called it New Guy Village, the jail. There were 2 other guys there when I went in. Johnson said the prisoners there were fed mostly pumpkin soup. How'd you like to live on that? Then they pulled grass out of the river and boiled it to feed us. Think about that. That's the main course. Rice was a staple that they would feed us rarely and on occasion. They didn't mess that up. Fortunately, I never lost my appetite for rice, even back there. A 6'4" prisoner of war, Sam Johnson said he weighed 195 pounds when captured. When he was released, he had down to 120 pounds. Now he went through all of that and never broke, never bent, never gave him a thing. When he was released, Johnson said, I just praised the Lord that I was able to talk to him. I felt that without God on my side, I would never have made it. And I've heard that from so many of the prisoners of war. You say, why am I giving you all this detail? Because that's why it's so important to have this center here and know what these great, wonderful men did. And then he got moved with 11 other people to another prison called Alcatraz. How's that? And they were put in leg irons, imagine this, for 2.5 years. We were all by ourselves in separate cells and getting out at the most 5 minutes a day just to get food and bring it back in, if you want to call that food. But these really weren't the worst times. They were in deep trouble one time when a prisoner hit a guard. They put me in leg stocks for 72 days. That's Sam talking. I was completely alone. There were no other Americans around that could even tap on the wall. There were just bugs, spiders, flies, mosquitoes, and me. Imagine having to endure all that. 72 days in leg stocks is no fun. I knew the Lord was with me because on the 72nd day, a typhoon came through and blew the covers off the windows of the prison. That very day, the guards came in and took me out of the stocks and said, we're going to take you to interrogation. Well, that's not a positive message. I couldn't walk, so 2 guards carried me over, stuck me on a stool, and this officer said, now we're going to kill you. And Sam replied, I love this, yeah, be my guest. Now, how many of us could do that? After that, things kind of eased off a little bit. Ho Chi Minh's death caused a change in their policy. It changed from bad to not to quite so bad for a while. Then finally, Sam and all of his fellow prisoners knew that release was coming soon. They could tell that by they started feeding them properly, even gave them enough food to get some weight back on. Asked if he ever suffered flashbacks. You'll love that Johnson said, "People tell me that we were not normal when we got back. I accused them of being wrong for a long time, but looking back on it, I think it took about a year to assimilate back into society, and for some of the men it took more than that." You learn, this is Sam quoting, I'm quoting Sam here, you learn a lot about yourself and how to survive in a prisoner of war camp, the congressman said. Fortunately, we were able to communicate a little bit by tapping on the walls using the tap code. So you knew the other Americans were around, even though you couldn't see them. During this period, Sam had memorized 374 names of other prisoners to his memory. That's a great mental exercise, just from tapping on the wall. We were all trying to memorize names in case anybody got out. So you knew the names, but you didn't have any idea of what they looked like. Most of the time, you never saw another American, except occasionally through a crack on the door. Now, keep putting yourself in this position. He said, knowing other Americans were there gave you a backbone, and you knew you weren't there by yourself, even though I was by myself. Sam thought of his family all the time and hoped they were all right. His wife didn't know for 2.5 years that he was anything but missing in action. Finally, they told her he was a POW, and even then, she got no correspondence, nor did until they let him write to her 4 years later. Sam says he always felt he'd see his wife, Shirley, and the children again. The Johnsons have 3 children, 10 grandchildren, and 1 great-grandchild a day, and all of that is because this indomitable spirit of him. And I could use him as an example of our men and women in the military forces. Back then, he said some of the prisoners had given up hope. The other prisoners had a hard time keeping them pumped up. We knew our government would never leave us, although the Vietnamese tried to persuade us of that every day. Johnson says, that's why I've been fighting ever since I've been in Congress as a part of the POW-MIA Commission to make sure that we have not left anyone behind. You say, well, is he one of a kind? Absolutely, but I'm going to give you some other stories to show you how typical his indomitable spirit was. We had another man there named Nick Grow. He was a major in Special Forces. I think about Nick Grow every day. I have a picture of his wife and his 2 little boys on my desk. He was captured in combat in Vietnam. He was kept by the Vietcong as a prisoner for 5 years. He was the only POW that ever escaped. That's why I'm telling you the story. You're not going to believe how he escaped. Keep in mind, if you're an American trying to escape in Asia, once you get out of prison, you sort of stand out in the crowd. You don't look like the other guys on the street. Many POWs tried to escape, but Nick Grow pulled it off. He was being taken through an area by the Vietcong, and suddenly our helicopters started swarming in. The guard responsible for Nick was walking in front of him. Nick realized the guard only had 1 magazine in his weapon and none on his body. As he was struggling around and watching, as the guard was struggling around and watching the helicopter, Nick quietly pinched the button on the magazine, and the magazine fell into the deep grass. The Vietcong didn't know it for several hundred yards. The weeds were waist high, and then he asked Nick to help him find his magazine. And Nick pretended to help him, but our helicopters, fortunately, were still swarming all around. Then Nick knocked him unconscious. 1 fist. Pow! Nick ran out in the open and started waving at the helicopters. That took a lot of guts. There was every reason in the world for the helicopters to think that Nick was Vietnamese and that they would strafe him. The pilot of one helicopter swarmed in to fire on Nick but said, "Wait a minute, let's capture this guy." Nick was waving to them, and the pilot thought, "There's something odd here." Then he realized he might be an American. The helicopter landed. Nick jumped up to the back of the helicopter. The rest is history. He came home. He served his country in a noble way, and then he went to the Philippines on a classified assignment and was assassinated in the Philippines after all he'd gone through. What a man, what a role model, what an example to all of us. Now, to close this story on Nick, there's a memorial to Nick Rowe on the edge of the big bay in San Francisco in New Jersey, in New York, but it's in New Jersey, looking across to New York. A beautiful memorial to Nick Rowe, and guess what? Sometime later, that's when the World Trade Center was bombed, and that's in the direct sight of his memorial, right across the bay. Well, at the end of the war, when the first plane was returning and landing in the United States, I received a call from Captain Jeremiah Denton, who later became Senator Denton. He called to thank me on behalf of all the POWs. I responded by saying, "Jerry, your highest priority should be to thank the men who went to Sante to rescue you. The raid was textbook perfect, but the camp was empty. The Sante raiders have gotten nothing but negative press, and now with the POWs coming home, consider coming together for the first time, not to be honored, but to thank the Sante raiders." Captain Denton's response was, "Done." I think he'd been through the same kind of stuff, but here he was. He was coming home not to be a hero, not to be recognized. He wanted to make sure we recognize those people that tried to rescue him. 3 weeks later, with the help of the League of Families, now that's the families of the POWs, and the help of Governor Ronald Reagan, who had POW children and wives in his home every Sunday when he was governor. That tells you a lot about his patriotism. He had John Wayne and Clint Eastwood and the returning POWs all honoring the Sante Raiders for a weekend in San Francisco. The reason they insisted on San Francisco is they used to fantasize when they were in prison, the pilots did, and I'm sure Sam did too, of flying under the Golden Gate Bridge. So part of the weekend was going under it in a boat. We didn't fly under, but we went under to it, and we went to Alcatraz. They didn't want to go over shore on that one. But this was a big anti-war town. We had the largest parade in history of San Francisco and one demonstrator. Now, isn't that a compliment to our POWs and the Sante Raiders when those people would not in some way try to disrupt it? It's a weekend the POWs, the Sante Raiders, and certainly Colonel Bull Simons will never forget. Another POW here, Admiral Stockdale, name you've probably all heard of. His patriot, he can be defined in these words: patriot, guardian of our freedom, hero, fearless, brilliant, modest, an outstanding leader, a man of absolute integrity, combat pilot, scholar, outstanding husband and father, and a role model for our nation. And those fit very well with a lot of the other people that went through this same experience. He always built others up, never put them down. He was kind and gentle, but tougher than steel. He always treated others as equals. He was admired and respected by those who served with him in prison, and that is the ultimate test. You find anybody that was admired and respected by the other prisoners, that's the nicest compliment they will ever get in their lives. He served 7.5 years living in hell. He earned the Medal of Honor for his heroism and for leadership by example in setting the highest standards for all of the prisoners of war. Most men could have not survived the brutality that Admiral Stockdale experienced. He was a man of steel. He did not bend. He did not break. And the more they pounded on him, the stronger he became, just like Sam Johnson. Admiral Stockdale led the first air combat mission in North Vietnam. He flew 201 missions, flying in the greatest concentration of missiles and what have you in history. The thing I can say about Admiral Stockdale is that when he came home, he was a hero and friend to all the other prisoners of war who served with him and suffered with him in Illinois. No nicer compliment. And one final story that clearly demonstrates the heroism and leadership of Admiral Stockdale. We had an Air Force jet pilot, an ace, Colonel Robbie Reisner. He was also a POW in the same camp with Admiral Stockdale. He was shot down by a missile, not another pilot, in the Vietnam War, and it's very important to Robbie that you understand that. He also fought the last personal air-to-air duel that will ever be fought in the Korean War. General MacArthur set it up with China's top ace. They met in the air over Korea. In the battle, Robbie decided he was going to fight him defensively because he had more fuel than China's top ace. Finally, China's ace turned around to go back. They went across the Yalu River. They went into China. Robbie was following him in. Robbie thought that the ultimate loss of face to China's top ace would be to shoot him down right over his own airport. Now, how's that for risk-taking? Well, to make a long story short, he got him, then he looked down, and there were 19 MiGs on the ground. Classic Oklahoma cowboy, he did a giant 360, came down supersonic, got 14 on one pass. And I've always kidded him since then about missing 5 on the ground. But that's the real story of the pipe. Why I'm telling you this, because these are the people that your museum honors. And this brings it all to life. Finally, when we were released from now, we're back to he's in a box in POW. He was there for 5 years, but he never lost touch with the other POWs because he would tap code. Guess where you got that from? Our friend here. He taught everybody the tap code so Robbie could communicate it. And when he came home, again and again, people would come up to me, point to him and say, "Perot, he's the only reason I made it back." I said, "What do you mean?" He couldn't talk to you, he was in the box. I said, "What was this?" He said, "When he was in the box." I said, "Well, how could he talk to you in the box?" He said, "Tap code." He inspired people to stay alive. That's something special. But anyhow, when they took him out of the box, and this tells you about the other POWs, they decided to hold church services to honor Robbie because they were strictly forbidden. They were singing "Onward Christian Soldiers." The Vietnamese came in and stormed into the room and grabbed Robbie to drag him back out of the box. And then Colonel Bud Day, who earned the Medal of Honor for his heroism, stepped forward and led the group in singing the Star-Spangled Banner, which was absolutely forbidden. When Robbie came home and I'd heard this story, I turned to him one day and I said, "Robbie, what was going on in your mind as they dragged you back to the box?" He looked at me and his eyes were twinkling. He says, "Perot, were those guys singing the Star-Spangled Banner?" And he hit his fist. I was 9 feet tall. I could have gone bear hunting with a stick. Now, how many of us have that spirit? But I want you to know the end of the story. At the Air Force Academy, there is a statue to Robbie Reisner. A miniature is given to the outstanding fighter pilot in the Air Force each year. It is exactly 9 feet tall. It has a stick on the base. It has all of his heroic missions and decorations and so forth around the granite base. And every single cadet knows exactly why that stick was there and knows those stories. Now, can you imagine how that motivates young people to want to be like Sam Johnson and Robbie Reisner and the others when they are in active duty? Admiral Stockdale was the one that ordered the church services. He was brutally tortured as a result of this. Now, words spoken to me over the years by a number of young officers who were under his command in North Vietnam sum it up. They said, Ross, I'm alive today because of Jim Stockdale. He gave me the will to live by his leadership and experience. Admiral Stockdale, Sam Johnson, and all these men, and all of this is available to everybody through your museum, have lived by the words I'm about to say. Words are plentiful, but deeds are precious. It's not what you say, it's what you do, in Texas talk. Admiral Stockdale was a man of action, a man of deeds, and above all, a patriot who loved his country. He was willing to take any risk to protect his fellow prisoners, and in summary, throughout his life, through Sam's life, and the lives of many of these other people I've talked about, they lived the words of Winston Churchill's shortest speech. Here's the whole speech. Never give in, never give in, never, never, never. Now, if all of our population was built this way, we wouldn't have these problems that face our country today. But aren't we lucky to have people like the ones I've talked about, and there are more if I had more time I could talk about. And they did so many wonderful things after they came home. But all of them lived the words, again, that are fitting that I'm about to say. When principle is involved, be deaf, that's D-E-A-F, to expediency. In other words, do the right thing. Now, in closing my comments, I'd like to quote from a Marine chaplain, Father O'Brien, who clearly defines our POWs and soldiers' contributions to our nation. These are his words. It is the soldier, not the reporter, who has given us freedom of the press. It is the soldier, not the poet, who has given us freedom of speech. It is the soldier who has given us, it is the soldier, not the campus organizer, who has given us freedom to demonstrate. It is the soldier who salutes the flag, who serves beneath the flag, and on whose coffin is displayed the flag, who allows the protester to burn the flag. Now, in closing my speech, I'd like for all of you to remember and never forget the last phrase of the first verse of the Star-Spangled Banner. Here it is. Oh, say does that Star-Spangled Banner yet wave over the land of the free and the home of the brave. And my answer to that, and I'm sure yours is too, as long as we have great patriots like the ones we've talked about tonight, the answer will be a resounding yes. And thank you so much. It's an honor to be with you.